Immigration in France, wow, it's a topic that really gets people talking, right? But beyond all the noise, what does the data actually say? We're about to dive into one source's pretty provocative analysis. It's all about the numbers, and it argues that things are changing in a big, big way. So let's unpack the evidence it presents together. So the analysis we're looking at today asks a really blunt question. Is French immigration out of control? I mean, that's a huge claim. So what we're going to do is break down the data and the logic that this source uses to build its case, piece by piece. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the core premise of the whole debate. Then we'll deconstruct the numbers, analyze the inflow, check out what it says has happened to the asylum system, and finally, look at France's new migratory map. Let's get into it. All right, first up, we have to get our heads around the source's starting point. The whole argument begins with this idea that the immigration debate in France is just stuck. It's totally deadlocked, and the source claims that, because of that, political power over the issue has basically vanished. And this quote right here, it really gets to the absolute core of the argument. If there was only one thing to remember, it is that it is out of the control of public power. The claim is that the state has lost its authority, period. That the power to actually shape policy isn't in the hands of politicians anymore. Okay, so if the state has lost control, what does that actually look like? How do you even measure that? Well, to build its case, the source starts by deconstructing the numbers. First up is what's called the stock. That's basically the total number of people from an immigrant background who are living in France right now. But before we get into the numbers, we've got to be clear on one thing. What does immigrant even mean here? The official definition from INSEE, France's statistics agency, is pretty specific. It's anyone born a foreigner in a foreign country who now lives in France. And here's the key part. Even if you get French citizenship, you're still counted as an immigrant in these stats. That's super important to remember. Okay, so check this out. This is how the source totally reframes the scale of the situation. It starts with the official number, 7.3 million first-generation immigrants. Okay, but then it adds their kids, the second generation, and that's another 8 million people. All of a sudden, you're looking at over 15 million people. That's almost a quarter of the population. And the source projects that if you go out to 3 generations, that number gets close to 30%. So who are we talking about here? The analysis points to a few key things. For one, it says France has the highest proportion of immigrants from Africa in all of Europe. It also highlights a big trend, a shift away from the historical pattern of immigration from the Maghreb and a move toward more people coming from sub-Saharan Africa. And for a long time, the main reason for that was family reunification. All right, so that's the stock, the big picture of who's already in the country. But the argument that things are out of control, well, that really hinges on the flux. That's the annual flow of new people coming in. And the source claims this flow is speeding up a lot. And here is the data point they use to back that up. Look at this. The number of first-time residence permits has almost doubled in under 25 years. We're talking a jump from 188,000 back in 2000 to more than 327,000 in 2023. And you can see a really sharp spike just in the last 10 years. So, what are the reasons people are coming? Well, this is where we see a pretty big shift. For decades, it was mostly about family. But that's changed. Now, the number one reason people got a new residence permit in 2023? It was to be a student. And that brings us to another huge piece of the puzzle, and an area that the source claims has been totally transformed. We're talking about the asylum system. The argument here is that what it was originally for is not what it's being used for today. And the key piece of evidence for that is the approval rate. Just look at the difference. In the year 2000, only about 13.5% of asylum claims were approved. Fast forward to today, and that number is up to 45%. So according to this analysis, that means almost 1 out of every 2 applications gets a yes. That's a massive change. To make this point, the analysis zeroes in on one specific group, applicants from Afghanistan. The numbers are pretty wild. It went from just over 600 requests in 2014 to more than 15,000 a year now. And France's approval rate for Afghans? It's over 70%, which is double the average for the rest of the EU. The source also characterizes this group as being mostly young men, often with little formal education. And this leads to what is probably one of the most controversial claims in the whole analysis, that the asylum system is being diverted from its purpose. The source points out that the next biggest groups of people applying for asylum are from countries the EU itself considers safe, places without war or persecution. The implication, of course, is that the system is becoming a backdoor for economic migration instead of a shield for people in danger. And to really hammer home the potential scale of this, the source brings up a study with a pretty mind-blowing number. It claims that because French courts have kept expanding the legal reasons for granting asylum, sometimes to whole nationalities at once, as many as 580 million people around the world could, theoretically, be eligible to claim asylum in France right now. Just let that number sink in for a second. So, we've talked about who is coming and why. The final piece of the argument is about where people are going. And the claim here is that the map of immigration in France is being completely redrawn. It's not just about the big cities anymore. The analysis also talks about what it calls the invisible population. It gives an estimate of between 500,000 and 900,000 undocumented immigrants in the country. And then it pairs that with another stat. Fewer than 10% of deportation orders are actually carried out. It points to one specific area, the Paris suburb of Seine-Saint-Denis, where it says the number of undocumented people could be as high as 400,000. And this is really the final piece of the puzzle, according to the source. It identifies a whole new trend. Immigration isn't just an urban thing anymore. The analysis describes a massive spread into the countryside, into smaller towns, especially in places like Brittany and Normandy that historically had very few immigrants. And the source claims this is a direct result of government policy, of spreading asylum seekers all across the country. So, there you have it. The argument is laid out. The source uses all this data to make its case that the scale, the speed, and even the geography of immigration in France have changed, fundamentally. The picture it paints is of a system that's no longer really controlled by the state. And that leaves us with the big, critical question at the heart of this whole debate. If this picture is accurate, what does that mean for France's economy, its society, and its future?